So last week we began this series on what it looks like to not live in the hurry that our world lives in. And I wanted to throw a couple of acronyms at you. The younger crowd will know these acronyms, but maybe if you're a little older, I'm about to teach you something. Okay, you ready? Here we go. The first one is YOLO. Miss Linda, you know what YOLO is? No, she doesn't. Okay, we're learning today. You only live once. All right, you got it? I'm going to test y'all later. You only live once. Now, all of us have probably at some point gone somewhere that we didn't have time to go. I think probably more of us have probably spent something that we didn't have to spend because we're like, we might as well, you only live once. Or maybe there was something going on and everybody else was doing it, you didn't have time for it, and you're like, YOLO, right? You only live once. This past Tuesday night, Connor and I went to Nashville for a funeral visitation, and when it was over, we knew we were going to be coming right by Topgolf. Tuesday is half off day at Topgolf. And so we left about 6:15 from that visitation, and I said, let's stop at Topgolf. It was 6:30. We thought, okay, we can play for an hour and a half, still be home by 10. We walk in there, they're like, listen, we got all kind of events going on, it's gonna be an hour and a half wait. And we're like, oh man, but we don't go to Nashville all that often. And I don't know if I said the phrase YOLO, but I was thinking it. I thought, why not? And so we left Topgolf at 10 o'clock at night. I had an 8 a.m. class the next morning, right? And so it was not wasn't a good combo, but it was okay. Like occasionally to say you only live once. Here's the problem with YOLO. If you are consistently living a YOLO life, you're probably finding yourself often in a hurry because you're trying to squeeze all you can out of life. You're trying to do everything because you only live once. But what happens when you try to do everything? Boy, you can't really do anything well, and you find yourself often in a hurry. All right, I'm going to give another one for you. Carl, I'm going to test you on this one, right? Carl, FOMO. Well, it's actually on the screen, right? You didn't see it. So FOMO is fear of missing out. So it's this kind of constant nagging sense of, I'm afraid that I'm going to miss out on this event or this fun or this knowledge that everybody else is having or knows, and I want it, and so it's this fear of missing out. Now this plays out in a lot of different ways, right? You can imagine this as the college student who does every possible event that exists on campus because they don't want to miss out on anything. Like there's all this cool stuff going on and their friends are going, or at least some of their friends are going, and then maybe that's not too big of a deal, but when it leads into like, what if somebody's like saying something about me and I don't want to miss out? Like there's like the whole gossipy side of it, like you can see where this plays out. Or you can imagine maybe parents who feel like their childhood that they missed out on some stuff. And so they say, my kids aren't missing out on anything. And not only do they let their kids do everything, they force their kids to do everything for FOMO, right? Or maybe you could imagine it as like this constant scrolling. It's like, man, I don't want to miss something. There's a lot going on. People have a lot of things that they're doing. I don't want to miss this. And some of you are like, well, I don't do that. Well, then it's because you get up first thing in the morning and you turn on the news. Because something might have happened overnight. You ever had that thought? Especially in today's world, it's like, good grief, who knows what happened since the time I fell asleep? Got to check the news. Right? Don't want to miss out on something. Now again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with saying, I don't want to miss out on stuff. But you can see if you live in this mode and try to do everything and know everything, you're going to be in a hurry. Now, I'm going to teach everybody a new word. It's not an acronym, and I learned it this week. Does anybody know in the Caribbean world what lime is? Anybody? Okay, so I was talking with a friend from Guyana this week, and we were talking about our different cultures, and he said, you ever heard of limen? Or what it means to lime? I said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. So he explained it to me, but basically it's this. Here's the definition. I think this is just from a quick Google. Liming is a casual activity that's often free of specific plans or agendas. Liming can involve sharing food, drink, stories, jokes, or just enjoying each other's company. And this guy who lives in the United States now said, when I was growing up, this is what we would say about the weekends. He would say, you want to lime this weekend? And all they meant by that was, we're going to get together, there's no agenda, there's no schedule, we're just going to spend the day hanging out. Doesn't matter when, everybody's just going to show up when they show up, and there's no, we're just going to hang out. Gonna lime. Isn't it funny that the kind of hurried lifestyle we live in the United States prevents us from doing this. He said when he came to the United States, he was shocked that like nobody had the time to just lime, right? Not that anybody knew what he was talking about anyway, right? But no, and think about it, especially those of you who are not at a free phase of life, or you've got some things going on. Can you imagine being like, somebody being like, hey, we're just going to hang out Saturday. We're just going to, no agenda. I'd be like, good God. Like maybe for an hour, right? Like I can put a schedule on this, but like just lime? No, I don't have time for that. We're too hurried. Isn't it interesting that sometimes because we live lives of YOLO and FOMO, it keeps us so busy that we don't have time to lime. I never thought I'd say that sentence in my entire life, but I thought it was a good sentence. All of that is indication of the hurry that we're in. Now, I think most of us recognize you only live once and fear of missing out. Those aren't necessarily sinful phrases. Sometimes like YOLO's a good, you only live once. Here's the problem. If you consistently live in those modes where you have to do everything and know everything, you're going to be living in a mode that you can't live in because you can't do everything and know everything. And then you're going to get exhausted and you're ultimately going to live in a hurry. All of us have probably been there before. So what's the solution? Well, let me go back to last week. If you're a guest with us or you're out of town last week, here's what we said last week. We said sometimes life is hard, busy, and hectic, and that's okay. We are not talking about busyness here. I'm guessing about everybody in here will be like, my life is busy. It's not what we're talking about. That's life. If you got a job, if you got a family, if you don't have a job or a family, you're probably making ways to keep yourself. We are busy. That's just life sometimes. That's okay. The problem, though, is that we often have crammed too many things into our lives that, and I'll add here, too many unnecessary things. And some things are necessary, right? And there are phases of life where it feels like there's a lot. We were just talking on the way here. Like, I just want you to know up front, like with this series, I feel like a hypocrite, right? Because I'm not good at this. And like this month, like starting today for the next 5 weeks, feels like too many things crammed. But there are times in life where it's like that, right? Like there's a lot of stuff. And so that happens. But when we cram unnecessary things in, it makes it even worse. And we live in this constant state of hurry. And here's the problem with hurry that I gave you last week. Remember? Hurry is nearly always, not always, but nearly always incompatible with the key values of the kingdom of God. And we looked at all these verses that said it's really hard to be loving, joyful, peaceful, wise, and a list of several other key kingdom values. It's hard to live in that mode, to live out those kingdom values if you're constantly in a hurry. And all that to say now, okay, well, what's the solution? And I'll just go ahead and, like I said last week, I showed you a couple of books last week that said these have been really helpful. This week, I'll just throw this one out here again. This has just been really valuable. Occasionally, probably once every 2 years, I'll say, hey, I read a book and the principles in it were really valuable and I got to share it with you. And so really a lot of what I'll share this week and next week, I'm borrowing these ideas from Comer here because I found them to be pretty valuable, very, very valuable. So how do we overcome all of this? I think the first thing we have to do is think about the way, and Comer describes this, the way that we're created. You ever thought about this? We are created in the image of God. We're like, yeah. But we're also created from dirt, dust, right? Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27. God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. He continues in the next verse, verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. And we read those verses and we're like, yeah, think about the incredible potential that human beings have because we're created in the image of God. It's beautiful. But in the very next page of your Bible, it says this, then the Lord formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. He later says to him after the fall in the garden, he says, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust. That's usually not like, if I were to look at you and be like, you're just dust, it's probably like a positive. Like that's kind of a negative feel to this, right? For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So, We're created in God's image. A lot of potential there. But the fact that we are created from the dust of the earth indicates that we are limited. And to dust you shall return. Now, here's my tendency is to focus on the potential side. Isn't that, like in church, that's what we talk about. Look at all we can do. Look what God can do through you. So step out of the boat. Take a risk. Go all in. That's the kind of language that I've often used. Rarely do we say, by the way, you are very limited. In fact, you can't do it all. You're made from dirt. You're human. You are extremely limited. I am extremely limited. Sure, created in the image of God, lots of potential. But we're also limited because we are from the dust. You ever thought about a list of the limitations that you have because we're human? Let me share them with you. Our bodies and minds are limitations. All of us have different bodies, different minds, but we're limited of what we can do. Our bodies age, we have illnesses, we're limited by our body. We only live a certain amount of time. It doesn't matter how much education you get, you still don't know it. In fact, the more education you get, you all of a sudden realize, boy, I don't know anything. Like the more you realize that you don't understand. Nobody has it all figured out. Nobody has all of the knowledge. We are limited in our bodies and minds. So you get to the end of Romans chapter 11, where Paul is talking about God's salvation in Israel, and it's really pretty complicated. Lots of debate about it, but it's funny then that Paul concludes it like this. Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? You say, we're created in the image of God. Boy, but aren't we limited? we cannot even understand the mind of God. So our bodies and minds, our giftings. I had us read during the scripture reading from Romans chapter 12, and we'll come to that in just a minute, but think about all of the different giftedness in this room and the gifts that we have. There are so many things that I cannot do that you can. There are things maybe that you can't do that maybe I can. And you look around the room and the diversity of the body says we're all really different, and I can do things and you can do things, but you ever look at somebody else and be like, man, I wish I had those gifts. And you don't, and you are limited. We are limited by our giftings. And so Paul will say, for by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly. So it's a call to humility than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another. This is a call to humility. But if that's the case, like if some people are proud of all their giftings and need to be humbled, the opposite is true. Like we acknowledge, boy, there's some limitations that all of us have based on the abilities and talents that God has given us. We're limited by our personalities. You ever met someone that can go be around people all day long, and at the end of the day, they're just energized? They have loved it and they're so excited, and maybe you're the type of person that like 2 hours with people, you're ready to go home and go to sleep right now. Like it exhausts you to be around people for an extended period of time. What is that? There are limitations on personality. You ever known somebody who can get away with like very little sleep? And maybe that's related more to our bodies and minds, but I think some of this is personality. Some of the most successful people in the world sleep 6 hours a night. Do you know what happens if I only sleep for 6 hours a night for like 2 days straight? It's not good. Like I am cranky, and like if I go like 3 or 4 days in a row with 6 hours of sleep, kind of like Tuesday night when we play Topgolf. Like if I do that for extended periods, I crash. But I know some people who like they do that every single night, and they're energetic and they're highly successful. I'm limited by the fact that I usually need about 8 hours of sleep, 7.5 minimum. I got to have my sleep right. Boy, I don't function well. You say, well, if you just got less sleep, more. No, I've tried. Like this just has never been worked for me. It's a limitation for me. Or we're limited, this is kind of a weird one, by our families of origin. Now, anyone can rise up out of any situation, absolutely. But some people are born in situations where they're maybe a little bit behind someone else. Or they had less, which is related to this one. We're limited by our socioeconomic origins. Again, we say, well, in a democracy, anybody can rise up and do anything. Well, yeah, it seems like, to use a baseball analogy, Some people start on third base and some people start like in the dugout. Like they're so way behind. Like all of us come from different economic backgrounds, and that impacts us, or our education and careers. If you dropped out of high school, that's a limitation for you, isn't it? But for all of us, our careers, our jobs in some way are a limitation, aren't they? You may be like, my job I'm limited by how much it pays, or I'm limited by how this hurts my body. Think about an NFL player. Would we say like they're not limited, right? Look at how much money they make. But then they might turn around and say, and look what this does to my body for the long term. Or maybe you're highly successful, and the limitation to that is you got to work long, long hours to keep up with. We're all limited in some way by our education and careers. This is a big one, our seasons of life. I love what Ecclesiastes 3 famously says, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. Then he lists all of these times in life. And you know that your season of life, whatever season you're in, has some limitations. Think about the grand scope of your life. 20-year-old you. You got all the time and freedom in the world, but you don't have any money. You get to maybe 40-year-old you, and you've got a little bit more money, but you don't have any time to do all those things that you wish you could have done when you were 20. Or you fast forward to like 70-year-old you. You have both time and money, but you don't have the energy anymore to do all the stuff, right? Like our seasons of life limit us. Let me give you an example of this, and it sounds bad, but you know that in a beautiful limitation is children, right? When you have children, all of a sudden you can't do the things that you did before you had children. Now, it's a beautiful limitation, but it is like we have to acknowledge like we're limited by these phases of life, our seasons of life that we're in. We're limited by our 80 years or so of life. We're limited, James says, what's our life? Just a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. That's real feel good. Like this whole list is real feel good, isn't it? We are limited. This is an interesting one that Comer mentions. He said we're limited by God's plan. And this is a tricky way to describe this. So let me just give you a biblical illustration. John 21, Peter has been told by Jesus, feed my sheep 3 times. And then Jesus predicts that he's going to be arrested, be led away, and then he's going to die for his faith in really negative ways, right? It's pretty brutal stuff. It has to be shocking to Peter. And they're walking along the beach, and Peter turns around and looks at John and says, well, what about him? Like, if all this is going to happen to me, what about John? And here's Jesus' response. Jesus said to him, if it is my will that he remain until I come, what's that to you? You follow me. I don't know, maybe there are times that all of us need to hear that. Quit worrying about everybody else and what God has in store for their life or the decisions they've made that have led them to this point. You follow me, but we have to acknowledge sometimes that the paths of our lives are different, and sometimes they are limitations. And then last, we are all limited by time. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So as you look at this list, it may feel kind of like depressing, but we have to acknowledge that while we are created in the image of God, and that's beautiful, and we have incredible potential when the Spirit lives in us, at the same time, we are limited, which means we can't do it all. Like I want us to hear this. We all have limitations, and therefore we cannot do it all. We can't know it all. We can't do everything, which means we have to learn sometimes to say no. We have to teach our kids how to say no. Now, here's the problem with saying no. It feels unchristian, doesn't it? It's like, oh, if I say no, it's like I'm not living up to Jesus' standards for me. No, sometimes we have to say no so that we can actually do the things that God wants us to do. Sometimes we have to say no so that we can model our lives after Jesus. Jesus said no. Maybe he didn't use those exact words, but do you remember when the apostles came to him? He's out praying. They're like, hey, everybody's waiting on you. And he said, we got to keep moving. I got to preach the gospel in other towns and villages. He was saying no. So if it's the case that we have limitations and we can't do it all, what's that mean? It means that we must choose wisely between the options in our lives. And this is where it's hard, and this is where we have to learn to say no. Now, do you want to get to the end of your life and look back and say, man, my career was highly successful, or my kids did all the things, or man, we had a lot of money, or we watched all 14 seasons of fill in the blank, but then say, but we didn't focus on Jesus. We didn't learn to love prayer, or we didn't learn to love our neighbors. We did all the stuff, and we tried to do some of that other important stuff along the way, but it wasn't really our focus. No, none of us wants to get to the end of life and get to that point. We want to choose wisely, and the problem isn't necessarily that we are busy. I'm trying to emphasize, all of us are busy. All of us at some level are busy. It's often that we spend too much time on things that don't matter. And that causes us then to live in a hurry. Now, this is tough. Because this is not to say you can't spend any time or not to spend any time on things that don't really matter. All of us have hobbies or things that we enjoy that we would acknowledge in the grand scheme of things, this doesn't matter. In fact, we would say in those things, I can still honor God. I can connect, I can love my neighbor well when I do those things. But all of us have some things we have to acknowledge. Those are actual time wasters. And they go from like pretty benign to pretty dangerous for us. And you could push back and be like, no, I'm not on my phone all the time. Well, for you, it's not your phone. It's something else, right? All of us spend time on things that don't matter. And I'm all about hobbies and downtime. And I love TV and movies as much as anyone else. So I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to anybody else. This is for me. But sometimes we're living in this hurried lifestyle because we're spending time on things that we know don't matter, and it's a waste of time. And Paul speaks into that in Ephesians 5, doesn't he? Look carefully then how you walk. Not as unwise, but as wise. What's it look like to use your time wisely? He says, making the best use of the time. Older translations say, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Like there's a lot of bad stuff around us, which means we've got to choose wisely how we use our time. So that then leads us kind of to this next question. What's it look like? What is the wisest choice when it comes to our time? Now it's an obvious preachery answer, isn't it? Well, we spend time with the Lord. Maybe we can say it like this. Sometimes we have to slow down and simplify our lives around what really matters. Again, nothing profound. We know this. I know this. Sometimes I just need the reminder of this. That I spend some time on things that are absolutely useless. It's not to say I can't ever spend time on things that are completely useless and meaningless. I just probably need to spend less time on things that are meaningless and useless. And if I learn to spend less time, it's probably going to help me to live a less hurried lifestyle and therefore have more joy and love and peace in my life. Last week, I concluded with this verse, right? This invitation from Jesus. And maybe this is, like, if we're going to choose wisely the thing that matters most, it's the decision to accept this invitation from Jesus. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden or are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. What an incredible invitation to experience the rest and peace that Jesus offers. And the most important thing we could choose, the thing that matters the most, is to choose to follow the way of Jesus. Think about when Jesus asked people or invited people to go with him. What did he say? Multiple times. He says, follow me. Follow me, follow me. And when somebody followed Jesus, what were they becoming? They were becoming a disciple of Jesus. And to be a disciple of Jesus meant that you would be with Jesus, that you would become like Jesus, and you would live life like Jesus. I mean, can you imagine following Jesus around everywhere you went? Can you imagine the impact that would have on you to have to live like Jesus? Can you imagine? Now we can think about, wow, can you imagine what it would have been like for these guys to live like Jesus? Maybe the better question today is, what would it look like today for us to live the lifestyle of Jesus? Or in this form, if we want to be like Jesus, we're going to have to adopt this lifestyle of Jesus. I don't know if I've ever really thought about this till I've been reading this week. What's it look like to adopt the lifestyle of Jesus? Was Jesus busy? Yeah. I mean, he was just constantly on the go. But was he hurried? I don't think so. He wasn't frustrated and anxious and angry with it. No, he somehow was busy, but there was something about his lifestyle that made him respond differently to the busyness and not live a hurried life. What would that look like? Come back next week and we'll talk about what it looks like to live the lifestyle or adopt the lifestyle of Jesus. Seriously, like, we're going to stop it right here and I'm just saying, come back next week. We'll talk about what this might look like. But let me summarize what we've done for today. So again, we're just kind of trying to figure out how to deal with all this hurriedness. Number one, we have to acknowledge we all have limitations. We cannot do it all. If that's the case, we have to choose wisely between the things that are going on. We want to choose the things that matter the most. And so therefore, if we want to be like Jesus, we have to adopt the lifestyle of Jesus. Next week, we'll talk about what it looks like to actually adopt the lifestyle of Jesus. Let me give you 2 things to do this week. All right? 2 things to do. Number one, obviously, this is between you and God, and I can't make you do it. Number one, just ask this question. What time waster could you cut back on? Again, I think most of us acknowledge there's something that we could probably improve in here. Something, even if it's something that isn't bad for us, from how much time we spend on our phones to how much time we spend in the newspaper, depending on your generation, right? Those things aren't bad, but probably most of us say, okay, there's something I spend a little too much time in. Now, in our culture, the majority of people, it's probably related to an electronic item. Again, maybe some of you are like, well, not me. Good for you. But for the majority of people, right? And so if you didn't know, and again, the younger crowd will know this. Those of you who are older may not have ever seen this. There's this thing on your phone called screen time. If you have an iPhone, I think Androids have them too. You just need to Google, how do I find screen time on my Android? But if you have an iPhone, see right there in your settings, if you click on that, it'll go to a screen where it'll show you how much time you spend on your phone daily. It'll tell you how many times you pick up your phone a day. And I'll tell you what, if you'll occasionally look at it, it'll hurt your feelings, right? The number is, this is not my screen, but the number for most of you, it'll shock you and you'll be like, oh no, I am wasting my life away by picking up this screen. Now, if you don't have a problem with this, good for you. But if this is your thing, I would just encourage you to check your screen time. Here's what I'm going to do this week. I'm going to try to lower that. It gives a weekly average. I'm going to try to lower my average. And I think for me, that'll be spiritually healthy. And it'll be a start. It's not the solution. Putting away your phone is not the solution. I've got a friend who lives a very busy business life, and so he's always talking to people and phone calls and texts. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the stuff we don't have to do. And maybe it starts here. Here's the second question, and this is a little more less to do and more to think. Here's the question I would challenge you to think about this week. Begin asking, what would it look like to shape my life to the lifestyle of Jesus? And just think about that between now and next week. Here's the problem with lifestyle. It's easy to look at a certain way of life that people have and be like, I want that. You ever seen some people or a group of people who are very in shape and they run every day and we're like, I want that, right? I want to be able to run that far and look that good and be that healthy. And it's maybe one of your neighbors who every day it never fails. You see them running down the road at 6 a.m. You're like, wow, I want that. I want that for my life. But we can look around the room and say most of us don't have that life, right? We haven't adopted that lifestyle as much as we want. Why is that? Here's why. We like the idea of fill in the blank, but we just aren't willing to adopt the lifestyle behind it. Isn't that it? That's why we don't do what our neighbor does, and he's in great shape, but we don't. I like the idea of that. I just don't want to adopt that lifestyle. So you think about the life of Jesus and the way he lived and responded to everything, and it was peace and chaos, and it was unanxiousness in all of the stuff that was being thrown at him. And there was joy and there's peace. And we look at that life and we say, I want that. But maybe the reason we don't have that is because we're just not willing to adopt the lifestyle behind it. And so, next week, we ask this question, try to give some solutions. What would it look like to shape my life to the lifestyle of Jesus? But maybe the simple question today is, or the simple invitation of Jesus is to just come follow him, just trust him. Decide, okay, today the first decision to adopt this lifestyle of Jesus is just to choose to follow him and put him on in baptism today. Or maybe it's just to come back to him or lean more into him. And if we can help you do that, we'd love to do so while we stand and sing together.
Once I stood